All right, look, guys, I love body horror movies. I hate Disney live action remakes. Now, this has elements of both. So when I heard about the new Norwegian body horror fairy tale called The Ugly Stepsister, I went in super reluctant, but I've seen it and I gotta talk about this thing. What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the garage. Another quick movie review for you. It's an independent horror film called The Ugly Stepsister. It plays on and borrows from the classic fairy tale Cinderella. Now, the movie essentially follows the exact same narrative that we've come to know from Disney lore for the most part, although this is obviously a grim fairy tale at its core from the Brothers Grimm, but also in this case, it's fucking grim. As usual, this is intended to be a spoiler-free review, so I'm going to stay away from some things that I really wish I could tell you guys about, but I do recommend this movie, especially if you're a horror fan. If you're not a horror fan, stay far away from The Ugly Stepsister. In a fairy tale kingdom where beauty is a brutal business, Elvira battles to compete with her incredibly beautiful stepsister, and she will go to any length to catch the prince's eye. Now, the reason I brought up the grim fairy tale and the fact that I want this to be spoiler-free, if you know the original Cinderella story from the Brothers Grimm, which was originally published in the early 1800s, then you pretty much know at least some of the body horror elements that you'll find in this film. The movie poster itself, which is probably being displayed on this video at one point or another, if not right this second, features Elvira's foot in the slipper with blood on it. Think about it. Now, when it comes to synopsis or plot, there's not really a whole lot else I can tell you, frankly, without giving too much away, because part of the beauty of this film, no pun intended, was the shock value that came in kind of knowing where the story was going and that it was going to be a much darker version of the Cinderella fable, but still kind of being surprised that they went there, because it is an all-out Cronenberg-esque, yes, The Substance-esque film that really spotlights and highlights the body horror elements that Elvira's character, the stepsister, is going through in the movie. She's our central figure. She starts out kind of ugly, although frankly, she's not really ugly to begin with. But based on the beauty standards that the prince obviously is seeking, and her stepsister Cinderella, and how beautiful she appears to be as a natural beauty, she's not up to those standards. Therefore, she's going to great lengths, along with the evil stepmother in this film, her mother, to become the most beautiful, or to at least become as beautiful as someone like Cinderella, so that when the ball happens, 3 moons from then, how long is a moon, by the way? I didn't research that. She'll be able to catch the prince's eye just enough so that he will want to share a dance with her, which will, of course, lead to marriage, which is exactly what happens in 2025. I'm probably going to butcher the name, but young actress Leah Matilda Skarmyren, Norwegian actress, absolutely slayed this role of Elvira, the ugly stepsister. She is phenomenally brilliant in this movie. She captures the kind of delicate lunacy that this character is experiencing, and it just boils more and more as we go through the film. The last act of this film is bonkers, shithouse crazy. It's not as crazy as the Sue New Year's Eve segment in the last act of The Substance, but I do equate this film to The Substance, but just being told from a period in the 1800s that would mirror the Cinderella fairy tale. But essentially, it's a rebuke or a satirical condemnation, kinda, of beauty standards, which is what The Substance really is at its core too, although it deals a lot more with beauty and age relation versus in this ugly stepsister Cinderella story, it's really just how men view beauty and what is beautiful to them and what's considered ugly to them, and how certain women will go to lengths for their own perceived beauty that ends up essentially making them uglier than they were to begin with. So the irony is kind of built into the narrative. But it also mirrors movies like The Substance because of the horror aspect in this film. Everything you know from the classic Disney version of Cinderella is happening throughout this entire movie. But if you go back and watch some of those Disney iterations or even some of those remakes, which, by the way, the Cinderella remake featuring Cate Blanchett is actually one of the very few that I can count on one hand Disney remakes that I would give a thumbs up to.
Madam will do.
But watching those and knowing that through line, that story is always told from Cinderella's perspective. The evil stepmother, the evil stepsisters turn her into eventually a slave in their household after the father passes, and she sneaks out to go to the ball. The prince notices her as the most beautiful. She loses her slipper, blah, 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 married happily ever after, right? All of that's happening in this movie. But while that's happening, we are seeing the story being told from a different POV. It's being told from the POV of Elvira, who is one of those evil stepsisters. What we learn predominantly through Scar Myron's performance is that Elvira is not really evil. She has the same desires and kind of faux life goals as someone like Cinderella or a lot of the Disney princesses in the way they've been painted in the modern era. She just has misguided aspirations. And it doesn't help that her mother, who is referred to in the fairy tale as the evil stepmother, is really driving this even harder and being a bit of a bad influence and definitely a bad parent in this film. But this is a movie that kind of has the beauty that you would expect from like this Renaissance era, grand ballrooms, princes and princesses and carriages and all that beautiful stuff that you would expect in a fairy tale we get in this movie. And the filmmaker did not shy away from making that stuff extremely beautiful and kind of cliche as to what you would expect. Whether you're talking about the color grading, the cinematography, the costuming in this film, the production design, all of it is top tier that would not lend to the body horror or Disney live action remake horror spectacle that we get with the film. So it feels very out of place at times and makes you uneasy with the proceedings, which I really enjoyed. The filmmaker here is a woman, which I think is interesting too, by the way. Emil Christine Blichfeldt. Did I butcher that? I think I probably butchered that, but I'm assuming she's also Norwegian. But what she does is she puts in these different events or things that Elvira is going through to achieve beauty as an element of cringe and a classic body horror. I'm not going to give any away, but things like eyeballs and bones and intestines, different things that if filmed in a certain way, even if it's not on camera, which by the way, a lot of this is on camera, but there's instances when it's not and when it's kind of insinuated, inherently cause us as the audience to cringe. Even if we love horror like I do, I was cringing in a few different scenes, particularly when we get to the kind of the end of this film, which is fucking it's going to blow your mind if you love horror movies. So look, much like The Substance last year, I do think it's interesting that both of these international female filmmakers are giving these very biting commentaries on beauty standards in the public eye among the masses, whether it's through the eyes of a fairy tale that we're reading to our kids and is still all over the place in terms of one of the great fairy tales, if you're talking about a princess story, or whether it's through a movie like The Substance, which shows us how it's viewed through Hollywood, through agents, through men that are tuning into different television shows and what they expect to see from their female host in the movie. When you get to be too old or too not pretty, then you're out, and we get a younger one in here. So it's a similar way to kind of tell that biting commentary, that story. Now, I got to imagine with the releases being so close to each other, that Blichfeldt, the director here, probably was not necessarily influenced by a movie like The Substance, but I do find it very interesting that only being released about 9 months apart from each other, that we got both of these stories that are both amazingly brilliant. I love both of them for basically the same reasons. The body horror aspects and the commentary within on beauty standards and our acceptance of beauty. Now, there's so many things that if I was doing a spoiler, should I do a spoiler section? All right, let me give you my score and then I'll do a quick spoiler, like 2 minutes spoilers for The Ugly Stepsister. And I'll throw a warning up on the screen for you and put it down on the timestamps. By the way, The Ugly Stepsister is playing in limited theatrical release as it premiered on April 18th in the US. It did get acquired by Shudder for distribution on streaming, and it is expected, although there's not an exact date, to be streaming on Shudder by the end of May. If you don't have it playing in your city because it's in a very limited handful of theaters around the country, make sure you check it out when it comes on Shudder. Go ahead and add it to your watch list on Letterboxd or whatever you have to do if you're a fan of horror and specifically body horror. And if you loved The Substance last year, if that was your cup of tea, you are going to fucking love this thing. Get ready. The Ugly Stepsister, for me, out of 10 is going to get an 8. An 8 out of 10. I think this is just a brilliant kind of twist on a classic story of beauty and the lengths that we will go to reach it in the eyes of others. And it is gruesome. It is horrific, but somehow it's eerily beautiful the whole time. It has a lot of jaw-dropping moments that, frankly, I still am thinking about. Man, what a film. The Ugly Stepsister, actually one of my favorites that sits in my top 5 of the year right now for 2025, and 8 out of 10. All right, so let's do some spoiler stuff here. Now, if you've seen The Ugly Stepsister, hopefully you stuck around for this part. If you haven't seen it, you're going to be spoiled from a couple big things that happen in the movie from a jaw-dropping perspective. You can't be spoiled from the narrative because, like I said, it's basically the fairy tale of Cinderella. It's just being told from the stepsister's POV, but it's the same thing happening, just a lot darker behind closed doors. I refer to this as kind of like Cinderella after dark. So let's talk about the body horror aspects that are meant to kind of make us cringe, make our eyeballs kind of pop out, and I'll start with eyeballs. So there's a scene when Elvira is being worked on by the folks that the cosmetologist or whatever you would call them that her mother has hired to basically improve her beauty and make her more beautiful. So there's a classic body horror trope in the movie where there's close-up shots of Elvira's eyeball twitching and moving around and being touched by the cosmetician, I guess, who is putting on fake eyelashes on Elvira. But remember, this is in the early 1800s, so there was no such thing as fake eyelashes. So what they're literally doing is threading it with a needle and sewing it into her eyelids, top and bottom. And it's a long scene, 2-3 minutes long, of close-ups with the needle penetrating the eyelid. Touches the eyeball a couple times, blood from the eye. I mean, it's body horror at its finest, and it's just so simplistic. Doesn't really have anything to do with the story. It's just put in there to show us that these elements are going to exist, and we're going to have to deal with this if we want to see how this movie comes to an end. There was also a similar scene put in there where she's getting a nose job, and in the early 1800s, there was no nose job. I don't think this would have happened in that era either, but what they do for it is they basically break her nose in multiple spots, rework it the way they want the bones to be, and she wears a face brace while it's healing for a week or a couple weeks, and then when it heals, she has a different nose, which actually ends up happening in the film, and it's considered a more beautiful, I guess, petite kind of nose. There's a scene where she's talking to the other stepsister in the film, who is not evil in any way and also not very ugly. Her name is Alma. She's talking to Alma, and she says that she's read, or somebody told her at one point or another, that she could eat or swallow a tapeworm intentionally, and that if she does that, she'll be able to eat whatever she wants to eat because she's on this lemon water diet that her mother put her on, and she's starving, obviously. She's like, if I eat this tapeworm, I'll eat whatever I want to eat, and I'll still get thin because whatever I eat, the worm eats. Okay, so she does that. She swallows a tapeworm. Now, that happens fairly early in the movie, maybe halfway through the movie. And from that point, there's a recurring issue, stomach, intestinal, that she's having because of it, which also causes a couple cringe scenes, whether it's vomiting or whatever, rib bones kind of cracking, that kind of shit. But also, we know in our minds there's a worm inside you that's literally eating at your insides. It's we know that the whole time. And they call back to it a few times to kind of remind us. So I wanted to paint that picture. When we get to the last 10, 15 minutes of the movie, batshit, absolute bonkers insanity on the level of the New Year's Eve sequence in the substance. Not as gory in terms of the gallons of blood that were being thrown on the crowd and the Sue monster that we get with the practical effects, but from the factor of can I handle this, it's just as bad in my opinion. In the substance, I feel like it was played a little more comedic, where it was a black comedy or dark comedy. They're both satires, but in The Ugly Stepsister, it was definitely much more of a serious tone, where it was you were almost sad for Elvira that she was doing this. It wasn't funny in any way. It was you felt bad that she felt like she needed to do this. Really, all of it. The prince has the missing slipper, right? It's not a glass slipper in this situation. It's just a slipper that she wore to the ball. Cinderella loses it. The prince gets it. He says, I'm going to tour the town. Whatever lady I find that slipper fits the other foot, that's my bride. She ran out on me at midnight, but that's who I want to marry. And Elvira hears all this because she's at the ball. She knows it was Cinderella. So she goes straight home. She grabs the other slipper that Cinderella had on. She goes into her room to try it on, realizes that her foot is too big for it. So what she ends up doing, which happens in the Grimm fairy tale, by the way, the original, and it's on the poster, really, so this isn't actually as much of a spoiler as I think it is, but I'm doing it in the spoiler section, cuts off her toes with a meat cleaver. All 5 of her toes, cuts them off. And obviously that makes her super woozy. She's screaming in pain. The evil stepmother and the other sister come in, try to comfort her. They give her some pain medication, and she kind of becomes drowsy because of the pain medication. Alma, the good sister, is like, we got to help her. What are we going to do, Mom? And Mom, being the evil mother that she is, says, well, actually, she had good intentions, but she cut off the wrong toes on the wrong foot. That's not the slipper that he has. He has the slipper for the, left foot or whatever it was. So we find out the mother's going to make her do this all over again. But instead, because she's kind of passed out from the medication, the mother takes her foot and cuts the other 5 toes off. So all 10 of her toes have been cut now. While all this is happening, like the night after, and they give her medication to help her sleep, the pain, everything, she's in bed, her hair is kind of like falling out, the tapeworm is taking horrible effects on like her body and her midsection. She's starting to look 10 times worse than when we first met her in the movie, which, by the way, like I said, she wasn't even really ugly. The movie climaxes from a body horror perspective with the sister coming to get her and saying, look, I can't believe Mom did that to you. We're leaving. Like, I'm going to take care of you. We're going to get out of here. There's an anecdote that she can take for the tapeworm that she was planning on taking after the prince agreed to marry her. But of course that didn't happen. He's with Cinderella. So she takes the anecdote, and the idea is you take it and that forces the tapeworm out, whether poo-poo or vomit or whatever. So the way it's played in the movie here, which as far as I can tell, by the way, is all practical, is with the sister's help, the tapeworm is physically removed from her throat. She starts by vomiting blood and a couple little pieces that we think are the tapeworm. No, this is like pulled from her mouth, probably, if I had to guess, 5 to 6 feet long. The sister keeps pulling it longer and longer. The camera will close up on Elvira and it coming out of her mouth. A beautiful like prosthetic of her head, basically, that is, the camera shoots it from the side. So you can't really, see the rest of her body, and you can't, for all intents and purposes, tell that it's like a fake prosthetic. Pulling it out, again, just like the other scenes of body horror, long time. 2 minutes of pulling this worm out of her body. Falls out, sister kills it by cutting it in half, blah, blah, blah. That's your body horror elements. That's your spoilers for The Ugly Stepsister. If you saw it, you know what I'm talking about. It's crazy how this is essentially like a princess fairy tale that has so much dark, disturbing things going on behind closed doors. And it's also super interesting to me that this was a lot of the original story in the Brothers Grimm, particularly cutting off the toes. And there's a scene with the crow going to the eyes, which they replaced with the surgery of the eyelashes, which is the same kind of concept of the crow's beak hitting the eyeball. So dark shit were going on in the 1800s, man, these fairy tales. But I gave you my score earlier. Thank you for sticking around if you've seen the movie and you wanted to watch the spoiler section of it. Again, it was an 8 out of 10 out of me. I would love to know what you guys thought of The Ugly Stepsister, if you've seen it, or if you're planning on seeing it, or are you excited for it? Let me know down below in the comments. And thanks for tuning into this movie review. I will see you guys out here next time. Man, I hope the shoe fits in the garage.